Last week we talked about free will and determinism, and today we're talking about the will to power, because as we're going to see, the will to power is actually the mechanism of free will. And not only are we going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about the will to power versus the will to apotheosis. So we're going to look at Schopenhauer's idea of the will to live, how that led into Nietzsche's idea of the will to power, and then how that leads into our idea as Hyperions as the will to apotheosis. So whether you've never heard of the will to power before or you are well versed in it, there's going to be some extremely important information in here as we look at the will to power versus the will to apotheosis. It's going to be an excellent stream today. Now, I want to remind you all that anyone who does support on Patreon will get access to my lecture notes for this video, many of my other videos, our secret weekly live streams, and our hidden Discord server, the Citadel. The link to the Patreon will be, in the video overlaid right here. But with that being said, let's start. So we're going to take a look at the will to power versus the will to apotheosis. And like I said, if you've never heard of the will to power before, don't worry, I'll be explaining it. And if you're well versed in the will to power, this is also going to be a very interesting video as we look at the will to apotheosis. Now, the idea here is that there is a power that drives the world, and it's within you, within reality, within everything. And you can learn to tap into it and use it to your advantage and to our advantage. You can use it to shape your life, and you can use it to shape reality by understanding what it is and how it operates. If you saw my last video, it is also the mechanism of free will. So last week we talked about what free will is, free will versus determinism. If you haven't seen that, you should go check it out. You don't need to understand this video, but it will be helpful. And we're going to see how will to power is the mechanism. It's how free will operates. Now, a lot of people define Nietzsche's will to power in a different way. A lot of people argue about what it is. There are different ways to interpret it. And Hyperianism has a very specific way of interpreting it. And so, don't argue about like, oh, well, this is Nietzsche really meant this or Nietzsche really meant this. Ultimately, this is how we're interpreting it and using it because this is how reality actually operates. So, for most people, the will to power is this blind force. What we want to do is convert it into an awakening and a awakened will to apotheosis, rather than sort of a blind will to power, right? Instead of a blind will to power, we want an awakened will to apotheosis. So to understand this better, let's take a little dive back, because Nietzsche came up with this idea called the will to power. And Nietzsche was heavily influenced by the philosopher Schopenhauer. So Schopenhauer believed that the world was will. Famously, he has the book Will and Representation. So for Schopenhauer, the world is will. And it is this sort of blind, striving will. And then all of our drives, all of our motivations, all of the physical world, everything around you is a manifestation or representation of that striving will. Now, Schopenhauer had an extremely pessimistic view of reality. He thought that reality was tragic, and he thought that humanity was a mistake, that it was an accident, and that basically to be alive was a curse. So Nietzsche was highly influenced by Schopenhauer, but Nietzsche took an opposite view. Instead of seeing reality as a blind, striving will to live, he saw it as the will to power. And he didn't look at humanity as being a tragic accident. He looked at humanity as being a stepping stone, a bridge to a new humanity, a higher humanity. And of course, in Hyperianism, these are Hyperions. These are those who will transmute a will to power into the will to apotheosis. So to get a better understanding of this, I want to take a quote from Schopenhauer. So Schopenhauer is telling a story about an explorer. And this explorer, and I'm quoting Schopenhauer now, saw an immense field entirely covered with skeletons and took it to be a battlefield. However, It turns out they were nothing but skeletons of large turtles, 5 feet long, 3 feet broad, and of equal height. These turtles come this way from the sea in order to lay their eggs, and are then seized by wild dogs. With their united strength, these dogs lay the turtles on their backs, tear open their lower armor, the small scales of the belly, and devour them alive. But then a tiger often pounces on the dogs. Now all this misery is repeated thousands and thousands of times, year in, year out. For this then are these turtles born. For what offense must they suffer this agony? What is the point of this whole scene of horror? The only answer is that the will to live thus objectifies itself. So Schopenhauer is looking at this scene, this story of these turtles that travel to lay their eggs, but then they are eaten alive by these dogs who are in turn eaten by tigers. And Schopenhauer is looking at this and seeing it as very tragic, seeing all this suffering and saying, what is the point of all this suffering? And his answer is that really, there is no point to it. It is simply a will to live. And remember, he thinks underlying all reality is this blind will to live. And this manifests itself in sort of all the horrors we see in the world, like that example of the turtles and the being eaten by the dogs, being eaten by the tigers. Now, Nietzsche would look at this same scene, and instead of seeing a will to live, he would see a will to power. Because Nietzsche wouldn't just look at the idea of this just being suffering for no reason whatsoever and just a will to perpetuate life. Nietzsche would see the power dynamic. He would see the turtle overtaken by the dogs, which in turn are overtaken by the tiger. So you see where Schopenhauer is just seeing, Schopenhauer is emphasizing the fact that these turtles are just perpetuating their life by laying the eggs. And then Schopenhauer is just seeing suffering, like the dog eating the turtle and the tiger eating the dog. So Schopenhauer says, hey, look, we have this will to live, and it's very tragic. It's basically life just perpetuating itself for more misery. So Schopenhauer sees life perpetuating in the face of misery. Nietzsche doesn't see it that way. Nietzsche looks at this and is not looking at it as life, the will to perpetuate within misery. He's looking at the whole system as a play of power dynamics. It's not just about the turtles laying the eggs and then suffering. Nietzsche is saying, look, there is a power dynamic at play. There are the turtles who are in turn conquered by the dogs, who are in turn conquered by the tiger. It's not a will to live, it's a will to power. It's not just blind reproduction in a sea of misery. Life is a dynamic of power. And also, if you've watched my other videos, notice that in this example, not only are we seeing the will to power being manifest in this story, but we're also seeing the dialectic at play, the clashing of opposites, like predator and prey. So, today's topic is the will to power. But I want you guys to really see how this all fits together, because this is concept networking. Remember, in the key to attaining hyper-awareness, 2 of the 3 keys are metacognition and concept networking. As we understand what the will to power it is I'll show you guys how we're using metacognition. But as we're seeing how will to power fits in the grand scheme of reality, we're using concept networking. And what I mean by that is you're seeing how will to power, if you watched last week's video, will fit in with free will, because we're going to see how free will operates, and also fits in with the dialectic. because not only in this story are we seeing this power dynamic, but we're seeing the dialectic at play as well. So do you see how all these things fit together? And this is what Hyperianism is about. It's about this concept networking, showing how all these different fields of study fit together to form a whole. Free will, will to power, dialectics, these are all different aspects of this universal force of life as expressed through reason and through our actualization and coming to know ourselves. So that's just a bit of an aside. But the main point is here, you see how we have Schopenhauer and Nietzsche and the same story, but you see how Schopenhauer interprets it one way. Nietzsche never actually commented on the story. I'm just saying Nietzsche would have interpreted it a completely different way, as seeing a power dynamic rather than just blind will to live and suffering. So, let's now, so we read a quote by Schopenhauer. We see it's a very, very pessimistic quote about this will to live. Nietzsche was influenced by Schopenhauer, but he saw it as a will to power. Let's read a quote by Nietzsche describing the will to power. And I love this quote. This is one of my favorite quotes of all time. By the way, if anyone knows the quote by The Mysterious Stranger by Mark Twain, I find these quotes extremely similar. The quote by The Mysterious Stranger from Mark Twain, and which is supposed to be Lucifer, and this quote by Nietzsche. Those are some of my two favorite quotes of all time. This particular quote by Nietzsche and the quote by Lucifer / The Mysterious Stranger by Mark Twain. So we've read Schopenhauer's very pessimistic view of the will to live. Let's hear Nietzsche's quote on the will to power. And do you know what the world is to me? Shall I show it to you in my mirror? This world, a monster of energy, without beginning, without end, a firm iron magnitude of force that does not grow bigger or smaller, that does not expend itself, but only transforms itself as a whole of unalterable size, a household without expenses or losses, but likewise without increase or income, enclosed by nothingness, as by a boundary, not something blurry or wasted, not something endlessly extended, but set in a definite space, as a definite force, and not a space that might be empty here or there, but rather as a force throughout, as a play of forces and waves of forces, at the same time one and many, increasing here and at the same time decreasing there. A sea of forces flowing and rushing together, eternally changing, eternally flooding back, with tremendous years of recurrence, with an ebb and a flood of its forms, out of the simplest forms striving towards the most complex, out of the stillest, most rigid, coldest forms striving toward the hottest, most turbulent, most self-contradictory dialectics, and then again returning home to the simple, out of this abundance, out of the play of contradictions, back to the joy of concord, still affirming itself in this uniformity of its courses and its years, blessing itself as that which must return eternally, as a becoming that knows no satiety, no disgust, no weariness. This, my Dionysian world of eternally self-creating, the eternally self-destroying, this mystery world of the twofold voluptuous delight, my beyond good and evil, without goal unless the joy of the circle is itself a goal. Very important in Hyperianism. The joy of the circle is itself a goal. Extremely important in Hyperianism. Without will, unless a ring feels good will toward itself. Do you want a name for this world? A solution for all of its riddles? A light for you, too, you best concealed, strongest, most intrepid, most midnightly men. This world is the will to power, and nothing besides. And you yourselves are also this will to power, and nothing besides. Beautiful quote. I think it's a little better than Schopenhauer's, don't you? A little more powerful. So there's this idea of Nietzsche that this world is the will to power, and we can think of it as this sort of ocean of energy. And as you can see, this is very important in Hyperianism, as reality is an ocean of energy, as defined by mathematical frequencies in the source formula. Now, it's interesting because Nietzsche was very opposed to metaphysics, but his philosophy of the will to power was a metaphysical principle. I mean, Nietzsche wasn't entirely consistent, but Nietzsche was a great philosopher. He got some things wrong, he got some things right. But the will to power was an incredible insight that he delivered. So, what does all this mean exactly? Okay, let's explore this, and we'll see if I read a bit from my book that might help elucidate this. So this is all nice. This is all very poetic. But what is the will to power? Now remember, I said that the will to power is the mechanism of free will, and philosopher Mike Hockney pointed this out. Very, very awesome. So how is the will to power the mechanism of free will? So in order to understand this better, I think you need to take a look at the will to power as being, let's see, let me put it this way. The reason why we want to look at the will to power is because when we understand the will to power is what drives us. It's what motivates us. It's why we do anything that we do. Again, like I said, it's the mechanism of free will. So we've defined free will. This is how free will operates. And this is where metacognition comes into play. Because remember, I told you there's 3 important components to attaining hyper-awareness. 2 of those are metacognition and concept networking. What we're talking about right now, this is going to entail metacognition. Because what we're going to do in metacognition is essentially thinking about thinking. Incredibly important. Self-reference is incredibly important to increasing awareness and consciousness. Self-awareness is metacognition, it's self-reference. Being aware that you are the one that is aware. Awareness of awareness is metacognition and entails self-awareness. So now we're increasing our consciousness by using metacognition to understand how our free will operates by understanding the will to power. So, and once you, and here's the most important thing. Once you understand it, once you know it, you can change your foundation. So you can alter it. And this is why we're going to talk about the will to apotheosis rather than just a will to power, because most people aren't aware of how they operate. They aren't aware of their will to power. And what you do is when you understand your will to power, you can then alter the foundation of that so that you choose the best choices for you and us. That's ultimately what we want to do. We want to understand how we make the choices we do, which is predicated on the will to power, so that we can optimize our life to make the best choices for us as individuals and the collective. Self-deification and collective deification. Self-individual apotheosis and collective apotheosis. So, to understand what the will to power is, it's both a very, when we talked about free will, and I said it's very simple, but also very complex at the same time, simply because humanity is not used to thinking about these concepts. Same thing. Will to power is very simple, but also very complicated because it's at the boundary that people are used to thinking about. So if it takes you a couple times, you might have to watch this video a couple times. Don't worry, that's completely normal. That's fine. Don't feel bad or discouraged or anything. Watch it a few times. It will take a little while to click. And it's actually very simple. So you might be overthinking it. You might be overcomplicating it. It's both complex and simple at the same time. So what the will to power is means that you will choose the action, right? If you're presented with particular choices or actions, you will choose the actions which you deem, whether you consciously or unconsciously know it or not, the most beneficial. Okay, so now it doesn't mean that it actually is the most beneficial. It's what you consciously or unconsciously deem or think is the most beneficial. That is what you will select. Okay, so let me explain it in another way. So in this day and age, algorithms control everything. Let's use it in the context of an algorithm. Think of the will to power like an algorithm. So imagine yourself as this algorithm. So let's say that there's an algorithm and it's presented with a field of choices. You can imagine this like yourself. So imagine you are presented with choices. I can go to church, or I can go to university, or I can stay home and watch Netflix. All right, let's use these choices. You are presented with a field of choices. How do you determine which choice to take? The will to power will determine it. Because imagine an algorithm that is introduced to these three choices. Now, what's going to happen? When presented with these choices, you as the algorithm will attempt to determine the most optimal solution or choice. And that should be kind of self-evident. It should be kind of common sense, but it's a little deeper than that. So when you're presented with the three choices or whatever choices there may be, you will attempt to choose the most optimal choice. Now, this might be unconscious or it might be conscious. And it might be the correct choice or it might be the incorrect choice. An algorithm can make a mistake. It's not guaranteed to make the correct choice. But the idea is that what an algorithm say, now I'm not saying you're exactly like an algorithm, right? Remember that. This is an example. But what the algorithm will determine to be the most optimal will depend on two things. One, the data available to it. And two, how the algorithm was programmed to determine what is optimal. So that's very important. How the algorithm will make the choice when presented with these choices depends on two things. One, the data available to it, because it's going to weigh the data, and how it is programmed to define what is optimal. For example, and this is the will to power, the selecting of the choice that is deemed to be most optimal by you. So, for example, our three choices. Let's say that someone follows Christianity. Well, what do you think that they will choose as the most optimal? Whether it's going to church or going to university or sitting at home and watching Netflix. And these are very, very, very broad, kind of silly examples, but I'm doing it to illustrate a point. Most likely they would choose to go to church. Why? Because they are running on an algorithm that is programmed by the Christian belief system. So how they determine what is optimal, or in Nietzschean terms, what increases their power, is defined by their base programming, which in Christianity says that you need to avoid sin, that you need to worship God. If you don't do these things, you will go to hell, which is the ultimate non-optimal solution. And if you do, you will go to heaven. So this person runs on an algorithm that is going to make choices determined by that programming. Now, someone who is an atheist is probably not going to choose to go to church. They're probably going to choose to go to university. Because for them, they don't have this definition of optimization that says that they should go to church and read the Bible because they need to go to heaven, because if they don't, they're going to go to hell. No, they're much more concerned with perhaps increasing their knowledge or gaining, let's say, a degree so they can live a nice life and have a job or something like that. So you can see how the will to power is a system that exists in everyone, but it doesn't have the same outcome for everyone. Because everyone will be subject to the certain different available data, and their algorithm will be programmed under different definitions of what is optimal. So here's a quote by philosopher Emrys Westacott talking about this. I think it'll illustrate this example better. The will to power, as Nietzsche conceives it, is neither good nor bad. It's a basic drive found in everyone, but one that expresses itself in many different ways. The philosopher and the scientist direct their willpower into a will to truth. Artists channel it into a will to create. Businessmen satisfy it through becoming rich. So do you see how everyone is running on that system of will to power? But not everyone is going to actualize it in the same way because it is defined differently. An artist will choose choices that enhance their artistry. A businessman will choose choices that enhance their business. Philosophers, scientists will choose things that enhance their knowledge. Now, these are very, very general definitions. And again, it's both a very simple but a very complex topic at the same time. Because here's the thing, you will carry out your will to power. You cannot go against the will to power because you are the will to power. That's what you are. So and again, we're kind of talking about it as if there's like you and then the will to power, and the will to power is making you do these things. We're kind of making it seem like that for the ease of trying to explain it, like as if there's this algorithm outside of you that's making you do these things. That's not the case. You are this system. When you are choosing what the most beneficial choice would be, that is you. It's not something outside of you happening to you. It is you. That is you exercising your free will. However, because it is you and you exercising your free will, you can't go against it. You must do it because it is you exercising your free will. You can't not do it. But here's the idea. Even though you can't go against it, what you can do is once you understand it, you can change the foundation. What I mean by that is altering your definition of what, let's say, optimization or power is. You will always choose that which you deem, whether consciously or unconsciously, to be the most optimal choice. You will always do that. You can't not do that. It is impossible not to do that. You must. You have to. But that doesn't violate free will because that is you exercising your free will to do it. If that sounds confusing, watch my previous video on free will and determinism. But that is you. What you can change is your definition of what those optimal choices are, of what is an optimal choice. So both the scientist, the artist, the philosopher, the Christian, and the businessman cannot change the fact, none of them can change the fact that they will always choose the most optimal choice that they subjectively deem as the most optimal. They can't change that. But what they could do, if they engage metacognition and examine themselves, know thyself, what they can do is change the definition of what is optimal, and that will affect their choices. You see, this is critical to understand. You can't change the fact that you will select certain things based on what is most optimal, but you can change, using metacognition, what you define optimal to be. And then that will affect everything. So this still might be a little fuzzy, and that's fine if it is. If it's your first, if you get it already, that's great. But it becomes a little dicey because, in my opinion, the word power doesn't really capture it correctly, and the word optimal almost doesn't really capture it correctly. We don't really have the right word to explain what exactly is going on. So by giving you various examples, I'm trying to get it to click what the process actually is. So don't let the word say power or optimal trip you up, because they aren't the optimal word. They don't totally capture the essence of it. So let me give you some more examples to try and concretize this. So you'll choose the option that you deem to be the most, let's say, positive or best outcome. right? So if you're presented with options, you're going to try and choose the most positive or best outcome, or at least like the least negative outcome if they're all terrible. You know, it's like, do you want to be tortured for eternity or do you want a quick death? If you are, you know, subject to terrible choices, you're going to try and choose the least terrible. If you're subject to, you know, different positive choices, you're going to try and choose you're looking for the best. Now, remember though, this does not have to be conscious. It can be happening at an unconscious level. You might not explicitly think, I'm going to choose the best choice. You might not explicitly be thinking that, even though unconsciously it is. And I'll give an example on that. Also, remember as well, it doesn't have to relate to the best choice as you as an individual, but it could apply to the collective. You could make a choice that is perhaps good for the collective, but not good for you. On a technical level, and again, it depends what we define as good. But if you were to do that, that would be because you have defined what is optimal to be what is good for the collective. And thus, when you do that, joy will accompany that, and positive feelings will most likely accompany that, and you will have done what you thought to do the best choice. So do you see? It's very important to remember, doesn't necessarily mean best for you as an individual. And it doesn't even necessarily mean consciously. You might not think that it is. Might be unconscious. But nonetheless, it's something that cannot be violated. So here's another example. Let's say, right, because basically what I'm saying is that you can't violate this. This cannot be violated. So, right, so let's say that you're going to choose to select a negative outcome just to prove that the will to power is wrong. You're going to say, you know what, no, it's not right. I'm going to prove that it's wrong by choosing a negative, something that's negative. Okay, well, here's what happens here. Let's say that, let's say you got a hammer and you go, all right, I'm going to smash my hand with a hammer. Because that's obviously not a good choice. That's not a best choice. That's not an optimal choice. It's a very negative choice. And so by smashing my hand with an hammer, I'm going to prove that the will to power is wrong. I've chosen something wrong. But here's the idea. This will not prove the will to power wrong because you have judged the act of proving the will to power wrong as being a more positive choice that outweighs the negative choice of hitting your hand with that hammer. You will have the feeling of triumphing over the law. You will have judged that triumph over the law is more beneficial than the pain of the hammer. And this is whether you consciously know it or not. So this is what I mean. If you go, all right, well, I'm going to prove that it's wrong by smashing my hand with a hammer, that does not violate the will to power because you have judged that violating the will to power would be more beneficial than the pain associated with smashing your hand with a hammer. But you don't have to consciously even know that. You don't have to explicitly know that. You will have known that unconsciously. So you might think that. You might, hit your hand with a hammer, go, ow, and then think, haha, I have violated the will to power. See? But no, you actually would not have, because you have triumphed. Because you have violated, not really, but you have thought that you violated the will to power. So you have triumphed, which outweighs the pain of hitting your hand with a hammer. Please don't hit your hand with a hammer. Okay, guys, don't do that. Don't do that. It's not good. Don't do that. But do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be conscious. It can be unconscious. You might not even know that it's happening. People don't know that it's happening. And it might also just not be correct because you're only dealing with data that you have available. So again, you smash your hand with a hammer, you think that you are making a choice that is negative, but it actually is not, because it is leading to the triumph of achieving the goal that you had, right? The goal was, my goal, violate will to power. How do I achieve this goal? I got to smash my hand with the hammer. And so that's what I'm going to do. And, I did it, but I achieved my goal. So you're achieving the goal outweighed You subjectively analyzed the situation and came to that conclusion, even if it was all on an unconscious level, even if you didn't know that that's what you were doing. And remember, you can also be wrong as well, because in that situation, you consciously thought that by hitting your hand would be the best option because it would violate the will to power and you would have achieved your goal. That's what you thought would happen based on the available data. But did that actually happen? Well, no, because you hit your hand, it doesn't actually violate the will to power. What actually has happened? Objectively, what has happened is that you hit your hand, you had pain, but you didn't achieve your goal because that wasn't a violation of the will to power. But you don't know that. You thought that you did. Therefore, based on your inner programming of how the will to power operates, and based upon the available data you have, which is a misunderstanding of what the will to power is, you made certain choices. So it's important to understand this. And it's really hard to capture in words, but hopefully these examples are making it click. This is something that will happen, will always happen. It doesn't mean that you consciously know it or not. And it doesn't mean that it's always going to be right. It's based on the way that it is determined based on your definitions of what power is, whether consciously or unconsciously, and based on the available data of the situation that you have. But do you see how powerful this is? And this is what determines your behavior. And you can't stop it, but what you can do is alter its definition. You become your own programmer. This is metacognition. This is why it's so important it's like hacking into yourself. It's what you're doing. Imagine a computer program that's running on a program, but it's not programmed very well. It runs super slow. It has all these errors. Well, what you can do if you're a programmer, you can go into the code, change the code, and create a program that runs much more smoothly. This is what it means by using metacognition to understand how you operate and alter it. So you cannot cancel out or negate the will to power, but you can transform it. You can harness it into a will to apotheosis. Instead of just being this blind force that's ill-optimized. And remember, it is you. It's not apart from you. So instead of being a ill-optimized individual, you can become Hyperion, a hyperly optimized individual. You can become an individual whose goal is individual and collective apotheosis by hacking into your mind and altering the program via metacognition. We're doing this right now. By you understanding what will to power is, you're engaging in metacognition because you're understanding how you operate. Now you can begin to alter it. And this is a tremendous part of Hyperionism. Huge part of Hyperionism. It's what inner star actualization is all about. This is what so many facets of Hyperionism is about. So we want to convert the will to power into the will to apotheosis. And this entails using metacognition to alter the definition of what is optimal. So in other words, it's the ability to reprogram the algorithm so that it will make choices that will lead to your individual and our collective apotheosis. And we talk about it like it's something apart from you, but it isn't something apart from you. It's part of you. It's your internal mechanism. And I always want to get this across because people will think, oh, this violates free will. This does not violate free will. It's how free will works. It's how free will works. Remember, randomness is not free will, and indeterminism is incompatible with reality. And if something were to operate outside of it, that would be something operating outside of you, and then that would violate free will. This is free will. This is how free will works. Again, watch my previous video on free will for a larger definition of that. But I'm going to read to you a book, part of my book called The Metaphorical Suicide, where I describe the will to power, because I feel like some of you may get this right away, but I feel like for some people it may still be a little fuzzy, because it's a little, I see that there's a lot of areas that someone could misunderstand. And it has to do with definition of words like power and optimal and best Because people, I'm sure a lot of people might think, well, I choose bad things all the time. Yeah, I know. That's because you're not consciously understanding really what will to power is. It's not that you never choose a bad choice. It's you choose that which you determine, whether unconsciously or consciously, usually it's unconsciously, that which will have the best effect. Doesn't mean it will. It's what you think will. So let me give you some more examples here. And so this is from my book, The Metaphorical Suicide. Available on IamHyperion.com and Amazon. Get yours today. I'm just kidding. Well, not really. You should. It's a good book. Anyway, so this is discussing. Okay, so this is also very important. So we're talking about in this section, we're going to talk about will to power and how it is used to increase awareness, which is incredibly important to Hyperionism. And ultimately, we want to transmute the will to power into a will to apotheosis. Because right now, the world is running on conflicting power systems. Everyone is running on conflicting power systems, right? So again, someone's will to power might be based on Christianity. Someone else might be based on atheism. Someone else might be based on Islam. Someone might be based on Hinduism. Someone might be based on, anything, philosophy, whatever. But you see how now we have all these different power systems that cannot be violated, but are all going to act in a divisive way, like the dogs eating the turtle and then the tiger eating the dogs. We don't have to live in a world like that. That's just how a world that is not optimized well behaves. So same thing today. If people are running on these different systems, you're going to have the will to power manifest, like, oh, well, let's burn all the witches, right? That's going to be something that they deem to be the best choice because, well, witches are going to spread sin and, corrupt the man or science is evil. Let's, you see what I mean? They, and then this is where the conflicts of religion come into play because it's like, my God is the right God. And no, my God is the right God. You have all these different power systems that are not optimized whatsoever. And you have this clash, just like the dog that eats the turtle and the tiger that eats the dog. We need to all understand what true optimization is. And it's, I'm really frustrated. I'm going to be honest with you guys. I don't want to use the words like optimization has such a cold mechanical feel. And I don't like that because it's not really it's alive, it's living. And I hate that we don't really have words that capture both, that things are both formal, that have a formal side and a content side to it. So please don't get turned off by when I use words like optimization. I know, because human language is limited right now. We don't have words to describe these things. So when I say optimization, I know it sounds very cold and dry, but it's alive, it's living, it's what you are. You are this self-evolving system. And, we use these words like optimization just because human language is limited and we're trying the best we can to put something ineffable that can only be communicated rationally through mathematics into language, which is not, it's not an easy thing. We need to develop new words, and we will develop new words. Hyperionism is going to develop new words, so such as hyper-awareness, etc. So all actions are done for one reason, and that is to increase power. Now, remember, power is we're defining it in a very certain way. Power doesn't necessarily mean like how it's colloquially defined. It doesn't mean that you want to be a dominating businessman. It might manifest itself as that, but it also might be for, let's say, a Buddhist sitting, in a forest who owns absolutely nothing. For the Buddhist, that will be them increasing their power. You see? It's because for the Buddhist, what is the best choice? Well, they want to reach nirvana. And so they want to give up attachments. So for them, so the will to power in the Buddhist manifests as, sitting and meditating, trying to reach nirvana. Manifests for the businessman as increasing their portfolio worth. It manifests for the Christian a certain way. It manifests for the atheist a certain way. So power doesn't necessarily mean how it's understood, typically. And all these power systems, again, are clashing with each other. You can see this in world, it's everywhere. Wars, sexism, racism, homophobia, religions fighting with each other. These are because these power systems where the increase of power is invaluable, but they're not compatible with each other. So it's dogs eating turtles and tigers eating dogs is what we have. We have a world of that. We don't need to have a world of that. We can all, if we all are operating within the same power structure, right? So instead of thinking that, oh, it's money that's power, it's nirvana that's power, it's atheism that's power, or that's, instead of having this, we will operate under that it's our self and our collective apotheosis that is power. And you see, if we all get on that same page, it's not like we're losing our individuality. It's not like, oh, we're all robots, we all believe the same thing. It's not like that. But we're all on the same page in that our power structure is optimized to understand and defined as is that which we seek is personal and collective apotheosis. A personal and collective actualization, if you will. So I won't go out and murder someone because I know that will violate what the definition of power is, which is collective and individual apotheosis. This is why we want to convert this sort of blind, as Nietzsche converted the will to live to the will to power, we now want to convert the will to power to the will to apotheosis. So instead of this blind world running blindly on all these conflicting power systems, we want to all define it the same way so that we're living in a world where we can all be ourselves and collectively optimize and actualize as individuals and a collective at the same time without running into these conflicting power systems. Hopefully that makes sense. Again, I feel like these are the most simple yet complex things to understand. They're very simple. They should be common sense, but the world, humans are crazy. Humans are crazy. And what you would think would be common sense, like don't kill each other. It's just like a wild utopian idea. Oh my God, you mean live in a world where we're not killing each other? Crazy. That's crazy talk. No. It's just getting started. It's the bare minimum. Anyway, so all actions are done for one reason, to increase power. So when faced with a choice, all people will choose the action that they think will increase their power. Doesn't mean it has to be consciously, it can be unconscious, and they can also be wrong about it. Everyone is continuously trying to gain more power and optimize their power. Remember, don't let the word power trip you up. Remember, Buddhist versus atheist versus scientist versus businessman. It's all going to be different. Versus artist. For an artist, power is perfecting their craft, expressing themselves, what have you. So what is power exactly? There is objective power, and then there is an individual's interpretation of power. Just like there's subjective truth, but many people subjectively interpret truth differently, right? There is what power truly is, and then there is how one interprets or thinks what power is. And again, it might be unconscious. Just like there is truth, there is a truth, but some people have different definitions of what truth is. Some people think God is truth, Jesus is truth, or science is truth, or empiricism is truth, or existentialism is truth, or absurdism is truth, or whatever. But there is only one objective truth. Everyone's going to think it differently. But if you want to know exactly what is true, you want to match your internal definition of truth as close as possible to truth itself. So same thing with power. We want to redefine what we define power to be to reflect what power actually is. And that is the actualization of ourselves and the whole. So, someone's interpretation of truth could be the exact opposite of real objective truth. Likewise, someone's interpretation of power could be the exact opposite of real objective power. So we could view power as that which will have a positive effect on that person's existence. Again, these words are really, they can be optimization or actualization or We don't really have a perfect word for it, but hopefully you get the point. Almost everyone has a different view on what power is, but regardless of what they think it is, everyone wants it and as much of it as possible. When faced with a choice, everyone will choose the option that he or she or they think will have the most positive outcome. When faced with a choice between positive and negative, a person will always choose positive. When faced with a choice between non-positive, which is neutral, and negative, a person will always choose non-positive. When faced with negative and negative, a person will choose the least negative. Likewise, when faced with positive and positive, one will always choose the most positive. This is the same thing as saying a person will always choose the option that increases their power rather than one that decreases their power. Once again, remember, this doesn't have to be a conscious choice, it can be completely unconscious, and doesn't mean it's going to be correct. It could be very, very, very wrong. Could be very wrong. You could think that, say, buying a lottery ticket is better than investing your money. You might think that one is better than the other, and so you will choose one better than the other, but you could be very wrong. You could lose all your money. But you could see that, you know, if you gamble it, let's say. But you have determined, whether you unconsciously or know it or not, that risk would be better than not taking the risk. Right, because I mean, no one's going to choose. It would be sort of like, do you want to invest your money, or do you want to throw all your money down the garbage disposal? You will not choose. You will never, ever, ever choose to throw all your money down the garbage disposal rather than investing it, unless you're purposely doing it to try and violate the will to power, which we've shown it itself confirms the will to power, or you have a different definition of, let's say you have thought, oh, well, I view living a extremely minimalistic life without attachment to money is best. So see, if you deem that as being best, then you will make a choice like that. You see, you can never not do that. You must. You will always. But it's about hacking into yourself and altering the definition so that you can live the best life, most expressed life, choose the best choices, and with minimal conflict in the world. There's healthy conflict, right? We can live in a world where we have ideas dialectically that conflict with each other so that we can reach a higher synthesis, but we're not killing each other because of it, and we're not being extremely irrational because of it, etc. So what power is for an individual varies from person to person depending on how they subjectively defined it. When faced with a choice between two outcomes, one person's positive may be another person's negative. What power is subjectively is determined by an individual's personal interpretation of reality. For a Christian, gaining power is accomplished by serving God, and he or she or they will choose actions that reflect that interpretation of power. An atheist's interpretation of power will be the complete opposite. So when faced with the hypothetical choice of reading the Bible or studying evolution, most Christians would choose reading the Bible, while most atheists would choose studying evolution. Both are faced with the same choice, but both choose opposite actions. For the Christian and their interpretation of reality, reading the Bible increases their power and thus has the most positive effect in their life. For the atheist's interpretation of reality, studying evolution increases their power and is the positive choice. Two people are faced with the same choice and choose an opposite action, yet both of them do for the same reason: to increase their power. Power acquisition is universal. All actions are done to increase one's power or to avoid decreasing one's power. But almost everyone subjectively interprets power differently. There's where metacognition comes into play, because now you understand the will to power. Now you can change how you define it. And this is how you convert the will to power to the will to apotheosis, which is a harnessed and directed will to power. So we want to change and alter the will to power to a will to apotheosis of ourselves and the collective. What I think power is may not be what you think power is, but nevertheless, we will seek to increase it. It is impossible not to. Everything is driven by the will to power. Conflict and wars arise because humanity has opposing views on what power is. So here's let me see if we can get to this part. So the more aware a person is, the better they are at optimizing and increasing their power. Someone with a high level of awareness and someone with a low level of awareness will both be continuously making choices to attempt to increase their power, but someone with a high level of awareness will be much better at it. Everyone seeks to increase their power. Almost everyone has a different interpretation of what power is, and some are better at increasing their power than others. The more intelligent and aware a person is, the more their personal definition of what power is will reflect actual objective power. So that's what ultimately what we want. We want our definition of what power is to reflect actual objective power, and that's why we want to convert it to a will to apotheosis. Because what true power is self and collective actualization, and we know this through understanding what reality is. We understand reality as this self-solving equation, essentially. Oh man, I just hate how dry it sounds. Remember, all these things are living. We need new words. All of these things are living. So we are this self-solving system. And it's actualizing. It's a living actualizing system. And so to increase that actualization, and we know that we are both one and many, that is what true power is. It is. So the more we reflect that, the more that we understand that, the better and more optimized we will be, because we will be reflecting true objective power. We will be reflecting what reality is, rather than having it's a bit like this. If you're in a city, you've never been there before, and you have a map, the better your map reflects how that city is actually laid out, the better you're going to be able to navigate that city. If you have a real shitty map, you could end up in the exact opposite of the place that you want to go. Same thing with the difference between understanding what reality is and understanding what power truly is. If your subjective interpretation of what those things are wrong, you're going to end up in the completely wrong direction. But if they reflect how it actually is, you're going to be making huge strides in your life personally and for us as a collective. And please understand how powerful this is. You watch, shit like The Secret, whatever. That is nothing compared to this. But this is hard for people to understand. People can easily understand The Secret, and they don't have to do any work. Oh, if I just write down on a piece of paper that I want to get money, and I put pictures of an expensive house, I'll start getting checks in the mail. No, okay, come on. No, this is how you truly evolve. This is how you truly take control of your life. This is not easy. This is hard. This is difficult to conceptualize and difficult to practice, to put into effect by altering these definitions. It requires metacognition, requires higher thinking. It's not easy for people. But this is, who said this was going to be easy? That's the question you got. Do you want to have an easy life? Or do you want to have a rewarding life? You thought becoming a god would be easy? No. It's hard. But oh man, is it rewarding. So, someone who has a little self-awareness will make choices more like an instinctual animal. Like animals also follow the will to power, but it's completely unconscious. They are making selections based on what they think will improve and what they need, but it's all unconscious. They go, hungry, eat. But you see, when we make it conscious, we might go, oh, I'm hungry, but I'm not going to eat right now. I'm going to eat later because right now it's a great time to read a book, or I need to go to my job now. So you see how even animals, everything runs on this idea of the will to power. But the more conscious you become, the more data you have available, the more you update your definitions, the better your choices will be. So a person with low self-awareness will just live in the moment and on instant gratification. Their desire for an increase in power is short-term. They don't have really a big, they're not able to really transcend the current moment and project into the future very well. They're very associated with, like short-term gratification, instant gratification. Like instead of saving my money, I'm just going to go blow it on, fancy clothes or something. Their goals are short-term, and they choose the path of least resistance. They take the easiest and the quickest route to power. The power they're trying to achieve is not well-defined, and they pretty much just take what they can get, whatever comes along. They live for pleasure and false happiness, and they ally themselves with a stronger individual to feed off that person's power. Power for that person is usually pleasure and happiness. Someone who is high on the self-awareness spectrum will have their goals well defined, meaning they know exactly what they want. They have a goal and they will stop at nothing to achieve it. Since they know what they want, they will have a well-developed analog eye. They can place their metaphorical selves far into the future and make choices based on long-term goals. You see how Hyperion, now again, we're engaging in concept networking here. Do you see how now the will to power is connecting to the analog eye? We've already talked about how it connects to free will and dialectics. Remember, this is now concept networking. The second key tool in developing hyper-awareness. We're using metacognition by understanding what will to power is and how to alter it, and we're using concept networking to see how it relates to the big picture. They can place their metaphorical selves into the future and make choices based on long-term goals. A certain action may seemingly decrease their power now, but they have the foresight in planning to see that it will pay off in the achievement of their goals. A choice to study mathematics rather than attend a concert may not give someone the pleasure of instant gratification, but this choice to study increases one's power in the accomplishment of a long-term goal, such as getting the occupation they desire or understanding the nature of reality. With a well-developed analog eye, they can put themselves into a wider range of scenarios, make better choices, and plan ahead. For this type of person, power is becoming the best versions of themselves that they can be. They want satisfaction in life, not simply pleasure and false happiness. Someone with low self-awareness has a poorly developed analog eye. Therefore, they cannot place their metaphorical selves into a wide range of situations, and they are not skilled at placing it into the future. They have a poorly defined sense of power and lack the skills to accomplish any long-term goals. In other words, they do not know what is important, and they have difficult planning ahead. Since they do not have a well-defined sense of power, they do not know what they want. They will take whatever comes along in that moment. Someone with a highly developed self-awareness knows exactly what they want and what is important to them in their life. They've made the unconscious conscious. They have a well-developed analog eye, and consequently, they can plan ahead and make the best choices to accomplish their goal. Additionally, the metaphorical universe, their mental space, more accurately reflects reality. This means not only can they place their analog eye into a wide range of situations and into the future, but their imagined reality corresponds closer to physical reality. Since the accuracy of their mental space is higher, the probability of what they imagine happening actually occurring is higher. Someone with low self-awareness may imagine themselves a world-famous singer if they take singing lessons. Someone with high self-awareness reflects reality more accurately in their mental projections and realizes that it will require much more than just singing lessons, like dedicated practice, originality, marketing, costuming, promotion, creativity, writing skills, etc., and will then proceed to make progress in each of these categories. Someone with low self-awareness may imagine that choosing to listen to rock music will cause them to become possessed by the devil. This does not accurately reflect reality and is an example of a poor quality, inaccurate manipulation of their mental space. It may seem that these are examples of someone with higher intelligence versus someone with lower intelligence. Yes, the more aware a person is, the more intelligent they are, and the freer they are. It is all interconnected. So you have this idea of freedom, you have this idea of intelligence, you have a certain type of intelligence as well, not really how it's colloquially understood as most people think of intelligence as fact collecting, which it absolutely is not. But I hope that you kind of have you should have a pretty good understanding of what will to power is and how important it is in developing your self-awareness. And why we need to convert the will to power to a will to apotheosis. Because as you can see, what you define power to be will be different for each individual. We want to all be on the same page, and we want to alter our will to power so that it is not simply about self-actualizing, but self and collectively actualizing. Because if it's just about self-actualizing, that leads to conflict. Because, well, if it's just about self-actualizing, why don't I just go kill Joe and take his money? I'll have money, and that will help me actualize. What does it matter? See, that's wrong. We don't want to just have that as defining our will to power. We want to specifically alter and transform a blind will to power into an awakened will to apotheosis, so that we have defined our will to power to be apotheosis, individual apotheosis and collective apotheosis, both individually and collectively, so that we're trying to create a better self and more actualized self, and a better and more actualized world, a better, more actualized community, collective, because we are both one and many. You see how this also ties into, now we're talking about developing the analog all, and we are talking about how it ties into understanding the ontology of reality. Because now we're defining all will to power and transforming it into a will to apotheosis with the understanding of what existence is. Because we know that existence is an actualized structure seeking to actualize itself that's composed of both one and many simultaneously. It is both one and many. So again, now we have concept networking into play. So you can see how we're using, do you see how everything connects to everything? I'm just trying to get this across. The importance of metacognition and concept networking, how both of these are two of the three keys to increasing your awareness and ultimately attaining hyper-awareness, which is the awakened awareness of reality itself as expressed as you. Through you, as you, not just through you, but as you. You are it. But truly knowing, it's one thing to be like, oh yeah, I know it, but truly stepping into it. Truly becoming awakened to it, seeing with those eyes, having that awareness, having that knowledge. So, just as Nietzsche took the will to life and transmuted it to the will to power, now, as Hyperions, we will take the will to power and transmute it into a will to apotheosis, for both us as individuals and us as a collective. And through that, we will create New Terra, that unconquerable citadel on the hill. So I highly recommend, checking out all my videos, especially checking out the video on free will versus determinism. If some of this sounded a little odd in such that, well, this seems to violate my free will, it doesn't at all. And to see exactly why it doesn't, check out my video on free will versus determinism, because we can see this is not some sort of external force impeding you or controlling you. It is you, and it is you expressing yourself. And now with metacognition, now that you are aware of how you operate, now that you're aware of how you operate, you can alter your internal definitions and operate that much better, both individually and collectively, and be on the path. Now that you've harnessed the will to power, be on the path to no longer a blind will to power, but a will to apotheosis. Always remember that. Transmute that power, that will to power, harness it. Together, all of us will. And that's how we get on the same page in that will to apotheosis. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports on Patreon. Especially Cassidy, Alana, Renaissance Fairy, Jordy, and Michael. Remember, if you support on Patreon, you'll get access to my lecture notes for this video and many other of my videos, as well as access to our weekly secret live streams in our hidden Discord server, The Citadel. The link to it will pop up here in just a minute. There it is. And it's the best way to support my work because of all the deplatforming and censorship on Facebook and YouTube. That's how I'm able to do my work. It means the world to me. So thank you guys very much.